Good morning. It's Wednesday, so as you know, 2 days in the week have passed and 2 days are yet to come. So Wednesday, middle of the week. Happy middle of the week to you. I have a question for you, or maybe it's a comment to me. We'll see how it comes out. The comment is, I like justice, especially if it doesn't necessarily apply to me. I like whenever the rules are followed, and I like when things are systematic and make sense. But for me, it can sometimes be inconvenient. And I don't always like to keep the rules. I think I shared this in another devotional. I probably have an issue here. But believe it or not, I set standards that aren't necessarily the standards of society. They're not necessarily the standards of the government. And they're not even God's standards. Surprise, surprise. Today's Catechism question kind of addresses that. And it's a very kind of sobering type of question. The question in the Catechism, number 24, is, why was it necessary for Christ the Redeemer to die? And the answer, I'll give the answer and then I'll give a little bit of some thoughts. The answer is, since death is the punishment for sin, Christ died willingly in our place to deliver us from the power and penalty of sin and bring us back to God. By his substitutionary atoning death, he alone redeems us from hell and gains for us forgiveness of sin, righteousness, and everlasting life. This is a tricky thing because on one hand, and we've seen this even as we've been going through the Gospel of John, people were after Jesus. They wanted to kill him. And eventually he did die. And it just doesn't seem fair to me. And as your affections for Jesus grow and you love Jesus, you want the best for Jesus, even as you're reading the scriptures, like it's painful on a Good Friday service to sit through Jesus' death. It's painful to read these passages where people are using him for his miracles or where people aren't believing in him. And I think as I look at that, that's painful, but it was necessary for Jesus to die. And we're going to talk about that. Because of our sin, we deserve death. That was the price. Christ, who did not deserve death, deserved life. Christ was perfect. He lived a holy life. It almost seems unfair that Jesus had to die. So why? Jesus had to die in order to redeem us. It was both Christ and the Father's plan. In order to fulfill God's wrath and the payment for our sin, justice would be served by us receiving death. Christ became our substitute. He paid the price that we were supposed to pay. He had to die. If he was taking our place, in God's justice, we were destined to die. End of story. But because of our rebellion against God, in God's mercy, Christ came and died the death we deserve. Christ took on a bodily form, he took on flesh, and he surrendered to a death he did not deserve. It isn't fair, but we needed it. He was a perfect, surrendering, sacrificial substitute for our rebellious heart. That's good news. He had to die to reconcile us to God. He had to die so that we could live. Colossians 1:21-22 says this, "And you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him." Christ's death appeased the wrath of God and drew us back to him. This is good news. It's not fair news, but it's good news. It caused a change in relationship. God now sees us as blameless and holy because of Christ's substitutionary death. Christ had to die that we could live in relationship with him now and for eternity. So in summary, why was it necessary for Christ, our Redeemer, to die? Since death is the punishment for sin, Christ died willingly in our place to deliver us from the power and penalty of sin and bring us back to God by his substitutionary atoning death. He alone redeems us from hell and gains for us forgiveness of sin, righteousness, and everlasting life. It's not fair, but it was the only way. Thanks be to God.